Don't have disgusting cold Channel 4 tea, which is awful. I think it's very important for us all to live up to our stereotypes.
Okay, brilliant.
And as the ultra metrosexual in the House of Commons, I have bought us kombucha, darling.
What the is that?
Yeah. Three different, can you bleep that? Three different flavours of kombucha.
Now, which is a vegan, unpasteurised
It's a tea. It's made out of pasteurised tea.
It sounds horrible.
It's actually delicious. I've had it. Just recently. I've discovered them. So, Gary, Jess, you start.
I might go raspberry lemonade.
You have raspberry lemonade. Apple crisp or ginger lemon?
I think I'm going to go ginger lemon.
You can have
oh, that's the least.
And then the ultimate thing.
Other soft drinks are available.
Other soft drinks are available. And then the other thing.
What is this?
I know.
What?
Literally.
Is that
they're called carrot cake balls.
I'd worked out the second bit. I was just a bit worried about
this. Tastes a bit like yeast.
Well, thank you very much for joining us this week
on Kombucha Daily.
Jess.
Yes.
Nick, thank you very much indeed for joining us.
You're welcome.
In another extraordinary week. And let's start. We'll come to some of the other stuff like the Supreme Court and where the strategy is going and the rest of it, but maybe actually this bleeds into the strategy. Let's start with the language of last night. We meet, it's Thursday afternoon, we're all still sort of clearing up the broken glass after the session in the House of Commons yesterday, and Jess, you've just finished an urgent question raising all of that. What did you think was going on last night, and was it a moment or a start of an era?
It's funny because I actually left before it got incredibly rowdy. I left at the point that Paula Sheriff asked the question, specifically relating to the murder of Joe Cox, and how, that had, understandably led to fear amongst members of Parliament, and how the language was inciting that. And whilst before that, the atmosphere, it was as if Boris Johnson was on the down because of the Supreme Court, that he had to come chin out, and no matter what faced him, he would stick out his chin. And all the cheering and whooping and clapping from his own side, without any contrition about what had happened, I found to be totally jarring with the colleagues I know from across the House, who I think would, they're conservative for a start.
They're more concerned about what's going on.
I think that they would be, but it was a definite moment of frothing where they were all clapping and whooping. And funnily enough, in the clapping and whooping, he didn't look that comfortable. He looked like he didn't know how to take it.
Maybe it's because he saw Michael Gove led the clapping. Which I have gone back and studied the screen for.
But, I don't want to present that it was only one side shouting and screaming in the House of Commons last night. It wasn't. It was all sides. And actually, I think that is part of Boris Johnson's strategy, is to use this language that causes such a reaction, sometimes an understandable human reaction, but often over the top. That place, it extends normality to every extent, because he wants Parliament to look like chaos. It's this sort of chaos strategy that we see from Donald Trump there. People just say whatever, and so that everybody reacts crazily. The dead cat strategy of old, but sort of ramped up with lies involved as well. It's as if this is part of the plan. And that I don't think I've ever seen before. I don't think I've ever seen anybody. And because Boris Johnson does not have good command of the House of Commons chamber, actually, but he knows how to start a riot.
Nick, completely planned?
I mean, absolutely completely planned. I have no doubt about that. The metaphor I would use is that it was like, in American football, rugby, less so actually in football, there'll be a moment where, perhaps the team's just gone one down, they've just lost a vital goal, and they'll sort of huddle, and there'll be this sort of male, bonding and motivational moment. And that's what it felt like. Felt like the government had suffered this, very serious setback of the Supreme Court judgment, and of being Parliament being recalled, and that it was like a corporate attempt by very much the men in the governing party to get around their leader and just shout to prevent any sort of chink being got by the opposition. And the problem is that, you know, to some extent, we are all guilty of this.
Absolutely.
We all, you know, and I've been on both sides of the House. I've been in that party and I've been in opposition now for the last few months. And, you know, there are moments where you're trying to help your team get over a difficult patch. By whooping up, you know, every time they say something and, you know, magnifying the attacks on the opponents, trying to destabilise your opponent. That is part of the theatre of it. But the problem, so I do think that, and Jess said it, I think that we all have to be, you know, we all have to look in ourselves and be self-critical and identify the times where we too have fed that. The difficulty, I think, is that on this issue at this time, this isn't just a debating society. This isn't a moment without consequences, and this isn't a moment without danger. You know, there are some people out there on both sides of this argument who are at such a high state of emotional tension and stress and anguish and fury that they say horrible things, violent things, and some of them, few of them, thank God, but some of them mean it. And if they could do something about it, would. And that's the worry. We could have had over the last 10 years lots of angry, passionate, over-the-top debates in the House of Commons. And the public would have looked at it and just thought we were a bunch of overgrown schoolboys and, you know, switched us off. And in a sense, that probably wasn't great for our reputation, but it didn't matter.
Harm anyone.
Yeah, it didn't harm anyone.
Isn't there a famous saying that if you want to keep a secret, announce it in the chamber of the House of Commons?
Everybody just turns it off.
Nobody watches it. But
now the problem is there's a direct link.
Yeah.
And that is why the fact that it is unquestionably Number 10's strategy to show Parliament in as bad a light as possible in order to then say we need an election to cleanse, to use a classical image that Boris would like, to cleanse the Augean stables, to wash away this detritus of Remainer MPs who are blocking Brexit and bring in a new model army of Boris, you know, supporters who will vote for pure Brexit. You know, that is their strategy. And it may, unfortunately, work, but it will have consequences that are deeply damaging for our institutions, for our society, and for, frankly, our mental health.
I think it's interesting that you say that it leaches outside. Just as I came to walk over here, there are always people outside Parliament, you know, that's absolutely fine. Funnily enough, David T.C. Davis was chatting with some of the Remain people who stopped me to shake my hand, and me and David T.C. Davis gave each other a cuddle. And we were like, I was just like, you know, tensions are frayed. But he's literally on the opposite side of every argument that I will ever be on, but it's tense. But actually, as I walked out, there's people with the Leave banners, and that's not unusual anymore. But what they were shouting at me today, they were shouting, Jess, getting my attention, humbug, humbug. And that's because that's the exact words that Boris...
they know that will most get under your skin?
That will most hurt me, because it's what Boris Johnson said in response to the comments about Jo Cox's murder. So that, you know, to suggest that what we are saying and doing in there, and so we all have to check ourselves, is not leaching out. It's literally, just now, somebody was trying to incite upset in me and harm to me. And it's not like robust debate. If that woman had come up to me and said, I think we need to have a chat about why you think this, I think you're ignoring your constituents, whatever. I frequently stand and talk to the Leave voters. I've had cuddles with them. I've sat and done like blogs and things with them when they've asked me to. That is absolutely fine. I don't even mind when they shout at me about it and they get like, oh, you know, you don't understand I don't even mind that. That is my job. But you know, like when you're having an argument with somebody and you know the thing that will cut them, and that is the only way you can win. That is what that woman was attempting to do to me. And it is deeply painful, if I was completely honest. And maybe I just haven't had enough sleep, but it hurts me that this is my family. These people are my friends. I love them. I'm watching Joe's children grow up without her. To try and use that to hurt me is just... I'm just so disappointed, I suppose, that people would have such lack of humanity.
We used to talk about... we've actually talked as a trio about a second referendum and how it might get ugly, and you said that's no reason for not having it, the rest of it. Assuming we have a general election before one, I mean, the next general election is going to be like nothing we've ever seen, isn't it?
Yes, I think it will be genuinely dangerous.
Do you dread it?
Yes. Oddly, I think, because for me, unlike Jess, because I've left my party and my constituency is one that will, only ever elect a Conservative member, I think. There's a almost 99.9% chance that I'll be swept away. So I could just stand down, which obviously a lot of MPs who face this horror have decided already and announced already that they're going to stand down. I do feel somewhere, for some reason, a responsibility to stand, even though I know I will be swept away, and explain myself in a sense, because I have taken some quite big decisions, and they weren't decisions I necessarily told the voters that I would, would adopt at the last election. So I do want to do it, but I dread it. I absolutely dread it in a way that, and I love elections. I'm sure Jess does too. I love elections. They are the most exhilarating.
Yes.
And you have
camaraderie
and so
everything.
much of our life in this world is unreal and cut off from real life. Elections are like just this huge sort of injection of concentrated real life on steroids. And you have conversations with people on their doorsteps about the most bizarre things. You end up in the most bizarre situations in people's houses and gardens and cars and
they undulate as the nation's conversation changes. And so you feel that there is this total back and forth between the body politic and the people, and it
there
changes.
is a big national conversation going on.
You're making me look forward to an election now.
But that is the great thing.
But this one?
90% of people will be fine.
Oh, God, absolutely.
98%.
And actually, in my constituency, I don't face any horror at all. So actually, the thought of going back to my constituency and going out and talking to people, it doesn't fill me with horror. What fills me with horror is the febrile atmosphere that will be built up around it, some of the messaging and stuff that will go on. And I don't think it'll affect my vote particularly. It might harm it a little bit. But what it will definitely do is make me into a target. And that will be by design. They are specifically ramping up an election campaign. They have designed it, they've tested it, they will have polled it. That is specifically to create division and fear.
And we will be, in People versus Parliament, we will be the poster boys and girls of Parliament, of this awful place that's trying to frustrate the people's will.
I've only been there 4 years. Boris Johnson's been in and out like a yo-yo over the decades. He's worked in this square mile or the square mile of Brussels, his entire career. I'd been in the building twice when I was elected. The idea that somehow I'm the establishment and he's the grassroots. Please.
Tell me a bit about Boris, Nick, because you have known him going back to London mayoral days and a bit beyond that. What do you think is going through his mind right now? The person you've known and you probably never thought would be quite uttering the sort of things you're hearing now.
I ask myself this question a lot, and I do find it inexplicable in a way how he has ended up in this place being this person. And I suspect, and every now and then you look into his eyes on TV or in the chamber and there's this sort of awful look of, oh my God, where am I and how did I get here, look in his eyes, I suspect that he too wonders. The first time I saw that was immediately after the referendum.
Yes, that was
when
phenomenal.
Suddenly he had people outside his house in North London shouting very nasty things. I mean, people doing all of the bad things that from the Remain side of the argument that we've been complaining about from the other side. Yeah. And I think one of the reasons why I think that he failed to step up for that leadership campaign back in 2016, immediately after the referendum, was because I think he was genuinely shaken to his core by hatred, which he had never in his entire life encountered or triggered before. His entire life had been, as far as I could tell, about trying to win people's love and adulation. And he's one of those sort of junkies for love, and a bit like Bill Clinton. And he'd been very successful at it. And the apotheosis of it obviously was the Olympics in 2012, where he sort of was everybody's favourite, jester king. And I think that was the Boris Johnson world king that he'd imagined. And I think at the moment he must be thinking, oh my God, I never really thought it was going to be like this, or that it was going to happen in this way.
But I bought into the plan and I got to stick with it?
I think he's probably, I don't want to be too pop psychologist about it, because God knows, we should ask him himself. But I suspect that he thinks that he can get through this, that he can use Brexit to win a convincing majority, and that then he can come back as everything he was before, and that everybody will love him like they did before, and that all will be forgiven, and that the lion will lay down with the lamb, or whatever that.
He has a classical allusion he uses about, or not a classical, a historical allusion he uses about Augustus winning lots of battles and then building monuments and pleasing all the people afterwards. And this is the vision. And they talk, some people close to him, of Blairite policies that will come in terms of spraying money and tough on crime and the rest of it. That tacking back to the centre ground, you think, is probably implausible, even if he dreams it?
I think it's almost certainly what he's telling himself to keep himself going.
I think so, yeah.
And to steel himself for this, because I don't think he's naturally somebody who loves confrontation.
No, he definitely
he really doesn't. Yeah. So I think he has to steel himself to do it. And I think he's telling himself, I'll get through this, and then I'll be back into sunlit uplands and calmer waters, to mix my metaphors. The difficulty, I think, is that the damage that will be done to the country, to its harmony, to relationships in families, in communities, to institutions and people's trust in those institutions. Trust is a very, very difficult thing to manufacture and an incredibly easy thing to destroy. And we've always had, as a country, one of the reasons why the world envies us is we've always had this extraordinary high levels of trust in our politics. Trust that it's not corrupt, trust that courts will make decisions and those decisions will be broadly fair. And you destroy that, you can't just sort of patch it back on.
Your fellow Tory dissident, Ed Vaizey, today called it political climate change. And once you've gone down that route, the weather doesn't come back.
And crucially man-made. This is being made by not just Boris Johnson and Nigel Farage got there before him and laid the ground, and we on our side,
I'm not. I think that we've lost some good people to Brexit, where people will say absolutely wild things. And there was some language yesterday in the Commons, like calling him a dictator, and some of the coup language that has gone on. I want it all to go away.
I was told by a front bencher, a minister who was sitting on the front bench with Boris Johnson, that he'd been doing quite a lot of sort of combative stuff, but he kind of lost it a bit when he heard one Labour MP call across, you should be in jail. And that apparently, this minister who's watching him thought that was when his blood got up and he started becoming a little more irascible.
Really?
But it's hard to know these things.
I did hear that. So, I mean, I didn't hear what you just said. I mean, I heard the shout.
You should be in jail.
You should be in jail, which, I mean, is a fundamental misunderstanding of the civil court system. One thing that I have enjoyed this week is being able to educate people on the judiciary in this country.
I think Jess made one interesting point, and this is perhaps not interesting for your viewers, but it's interesting for us sort of, political nerds, which is the link with the fact, which is a fact, it's not open to debate really, that he does not have natural authority in the House of Commons.
He doesn't.
Now, it's a very strange thing, natural authority in the House of Commons, because people who you think would have it often don't. And people who you think don't have it and don't seem to have it in other contexts do. And the test of it is, does it naturally fall silent? Are you able to slow down and actually to lower the decibels and people strain to hear you so they make ever less noise? And some people can do it, and nobody can do it all of the time.
No.
But some people can do it, and Boris, curiously, cannot and has never been able to. And last night, what I found so interesting was listening to his statement, is that I could barely hear any of it. And he was shouting. And there's a microphone straight in front of him, and he was shouting into it. And the amplification in the chamber is pretty good. And it's just, whether it's the register of his voice, or whether it's that he speaks too fast, he mumbles, but he doesn't command the place. And the trouble with that is that if you don't naturally command it, you then have to go even more over the top to cut through if you're facing a barrage from the other side.
Is it just me, Jess, or have I noticed Jeremy Corbyn responding to all of that and almost sort of slowing down and speaking more quietly and trying to own the sort of more managerial end of the market?
I don't know if he's trying to, if he's specifically trying to slow down. I definitely think that. Whether he's looking better in people's eyes, I think is yet to be seen. But I'd say in Parliament's eyes, Jeremy Corbyn has managed the pitch of it completely right over the last couple of days. And in fact, during the urgent statement today, and he came and spoke to me beforehand, because obviously it was my urgent question rather, to make sure that our tones would be the same. He got it very well right. He got it completely right. And he also, one of the things that he got right, which was totally lacking on the other side, both yesterday and today, was the humility that it happens on both sides. I think he did. The sort of pause for thought that nobody is innocent in this game, and that actually that it's duty on him actually as well to make sure that when we stand up and speak, that we do it with care and respect. And so that, I think, and Jeremy Corbyn, funnily enough, it's what did him well in the 2017 general election up against Theresa May, is that where Boris lacks humanity in this sense, Jeremy Corbyn can very, very quickly, when he wants to, exude avuncular.
But this is still not a House of Commons that's going to elect him as a caretaker.
No. I can't say that, no.
Interesting, just on this, just because I think it's a little tiny straw that may or may not turn out to be significant in the future. In a way that I hadn't previously detected, Jo Swinson has it.
Yes.
So in every single intervention she has made as leader of the Liberal Democrats in the chamber has listened.
Yeah, that's right.
And heard every word.
Yeah.
And I think that's
Are you on another political journey?
No, God knows, many people have asked me, and I can reassure you right now, I'm a great fan, and she would be, of the people on offer, my candidate for Prime Minister at the next election, but I will not be joining the Liberal Democrats ever. But
that's very
interestingly, Vince Cable didn't have it. Tim Farron didn't have it. Nick Clegg, weirdly, only had it sometimes. He often sounded sort of petulant, and she does have that sort of. It's that sort of everybody falls silent naturally. I don't know where it comes from.
It came. House of Commons went quite yesterday, when you asked a question, Nick, of the Attorney General.
Darling, I have it in spades.
Oh, of course.
I just say I think I have
You
it.
do.
They were very quiet
People
for you.
are silent.
They
I
were
think
quite
they're worried
few.
that I'm going to talk about like some sort of terrible violence against women, and it would be really uncalled for people to be like yah-booing at me.
Yes, you do have that advantage. Your specialist subject is one in which one's got to be solemn.
Nick, you were asking the Attorney General, will the government obey the law passed by Parliament which requires the Prime Minister to request a delay to the Brexit date if he hasn't got a deal? And the answer came back from Geoffrey Cox.
Uncharacteristically short.
Yes.
Yes,
He just said yes.
Yeah.
That was the only good answer of the entire episode.
It was a question.
So well done.
It was a question that we'd asked the Prime Minister in New York earlier in the week, and he didn't want to answer it. And when you go to people in Number 10, they say, we'll obey that law, but we don't think it's as watertight as you do. Where do you think that's all going to end? And is the short answer back in the Supreme Court?
No, I think they've learnt their lesson, probably, that they won't win in the Supreme Court. But yeah, you're right, actually. I don't know why. I keep constantly trying to have good faith in them, and yet they constantly let me down. I don't know why I keep doing this, but do you know what? That's more about me than it is about them, and I'm going to try and continue to have good faith. I think that they won't try and test it. I think
you think Boris Johnson will sign that letter?
I think Boris Johnson will try and come back with a deal. I keep on trying to say that Boris Johnson should try and bring a deal, even if it is just Theresa May's deal, slightly jazzed up. I think that, and one of the things I said to him today when I was challenging him, I said,
To Boris Johnson.
To Boris Johnson, sort of bring a deal. Like, why is it that you have the opportunity to
This is when
do
you bumped
this.
into him.
This is when I bumped into him. I just don't understand why he's choosing the fight, not choosing the unity. I think it was Antoinette Sambach said to him yesterday, when he was standing for to be the Prime Minister, in fact, yes, to be the Prime Minister, to be the leader of the Tories, he said one of the things he'd do is would act with consensus. And she said, can I ask what efforts he's made towards that? And I mean, I have written to Boris Johnson and asked to meet him, never got anywhere. Yeah, I think that there's a chance he could get a deal, and maybe that's what he's banking on when he says the two completely opposite things. I watched him being interviewed yesterday, and he said, I will both abide by the law that says that the banner, and we're leaving on the 31st of October. And it's a bit like the only solution there is a deal. So that must be what he's talking about.
I think Jess is right, but I think that we all can tend to think that a government is one voice, one mind, one plan. Even that a Number 10 Downing Street is one voice, one mind, one plan. And it really isn't. So obviously, clearly, there are many and maybe even most members of the cabinet who would not be able to stay in the cabinet, who would feel themselves that they could not stay in the cabinet if the government did not obey the law and did not therefore send a letter requesting an extension if the Prime Minister is unable to get a deal through Parliament or get Parliament to support no deal, which is what that law says. So clearly there are, I'm sure that the Lord Chancellor, I'm sure that the Attorney General, but I'm sure more broadly than that there are members of the Cabinet who would feel that they couldn't stay in a government that had set its face against obeying the law. But I'm sure that also there are people in Number 10 Downing Street, probably more advisors than frontline politicians, who feel that this is just a perfect further battle in the overall campaign of, champion of the people versus the institutions, versus Parliament, versus the courts. And they're thinking, bring it on. What we're longing for, is the policeman to be walking up Number 10 Downing Street and, trying to handcuff the Prime Minister and haul him off to Belmarsh.
I mean, it's funnily enough one of the things that Jeremy Corbyn, when he was going to be elected, one of the images that you kept seeing was Jeremy Corbyn being led away by a police officer at an apartheid rally or something. And Caroline Lucas very much, I think we've seen, this is I think he wants that. He wants to be seen as some
certainly
sort
some
of
of his
freedom
advisors
fighter.
do.
Oh yes,
Certainly some
yeah.
of his
I
advisors
don't
do.
actually. Once again, in the good faith, I do not wish to speak for Boris Johnson or suggest that he thinks I can only act on what he shows me, and so far, not cracking.
It's almost like you both put on those sort of electric dog collars that people want banned, and you keep pulling back from electric.
And I think that you're absolutely right, because my natural instinct is to bare my teeth. My natural instinct is to lose my temper and to act with passion. And I'm not suggesting that I am being dispassionate, but the nation currently needs me to behave myself, and it needs Boris Johnson to behave himself. So it is absolutely not in my natural instinct to not, frankly, swear and rant and scream and shout at people shouting at me. It is not. I will probably, implode when I get back to Birmingham later. But this is not what is about best for me to vent. This is about what is best for the country, and they need us to pull back and try and be reasonable.
And bite our lips if we can.
Can I ask you just finally about a scenario that is potentially in front of us? Let's say Boris Johnson doesn't come back with a deal, and we're left with this government which Geoffrey Cox virtually admitted yesterday the government had no power, he more or less. We cannot govern, he said. Parliament has made it powerless. How long can that situation
You might say that
sustain?
The Prime Minister has contributed by firing 21 of his own MPs.
Probably didn't help.
But,
I didn't get rid of his majority. He managed that all by himself.
But how long can this sort of zombie government, that's a word we're going to allow?
I don't want to be the thought police.
How long can it carry on? Let's say the Supreme Court instructs, or somehow Mark Sedwill, the Cabinet Secretary, signs the delay. We've got past the 31st of October, say, in this scenario, and he's still there, and Parliament is occasionally trying to sort of force feed Boris Johnson.
No, but then it's an election.
Bits of legislation.
Yes, I'd say
you move to an election.
I think as soon as we're past November the 1st.
I think it's an election.
Once you've got the delay, we're into
the
election.
Delay. Yeah, I think that once we've got the delay, you're totally into an election, and we all have to live by that, such is democracy.
It's actually right. I don't think that there's any merit to their argument that Parliament should be giving them an election now, because there's this enormous cliff edge, this enormous risk on the 31st of October. It would be reckless to allow an election to happen before then, or even during that period. But as soon as we have ensured that the nation is not driving off a precipice on the 31st of October, because an extension has been sought and secured, as soon as that, then I think they do have a right to say, we can't govern. Absolutely. Nobody else can govern because the numbers aren't there. So actually, the only way to deal with this is to go back and elect a new parliament. Whether that will solve anything is, of course, a quite different question.
Also, they can govern if they just don't try and do stupid stuff.
Well, that's true.
I would vote for it. Do you know what I mean? If they want to put 20,000 new police officers on the street and, more to make it actually extra police officers, if they're going to be giving money to schools, I'm not going to vote against these things. I'm going to vote for them.
Betting on the outcome of the next election, which is another way of saying, is the strategy going to work? What would you say, Jess?
The outcome of the next election, I keep seeing these polls that are, if this has happened, how will you vote? I don't know how I don't know how those polls are modelled, because I don't know how I'll feel about, tomorrow, let alone, I know who I'm going to vote for.
Else. There's lots of evidence that nobody has the first clue how they behave.
So it entirely depends on what happens beforehand and what happens with the Brexit party vote, I suppose, which, once again, we're back to 2015, where all the political parties are running scared from Nigel Farage's party, and I just wish we would front it out a little bit more, but we are where we are.
Hung Parliament, your greatest expectation?
I expect more of the same. What I expect is that the Labour Party and the Conservative Party will both contract, and there will be a growth of both the Brexit Party and the Liberal Democrat Party, and maybe a number of other smatterings, Greenie, Independent-y. But the balance, the trouble is when I say that, the balance is I'm falling foul of the exact thing that we're trying to stop people doing when we're having a general election. I'm talking about Brexit balance. And that isn't the balance that should be the most important thing in a general election. And that's why, for me, the general election doesn't solve the Brexit issue, because the general election becomes the Rorschach test, where whoever looks at it can judge the result of a general election and say, oh, it's exactly what I say it is.
But you've said a couple of times there you think hung parliament's probably the most likely outcome of the next general election.
Inevitable.
In which case Johnson is gone.
Well, I mean, whether he's gone, because I think he could easily be the largest party in that hung parliament.
I think that's probably
the problem is I don't know who he has to form a government with, because the DUP certainly isn't going to gain seats, and I think they think that they're probably going to lose a few. Yeah. I think there are only two things that I would say were betting certainties. That the SNP are going to grow, they're going to gain seats in Scotland at the expense of both the Conservative and Labour. The Liberal Democrats are going to grow, that's partly because they went back to a very, very low base, but they'll go up to sort of 30, 40 and maybe 60. As Jess said, the two main parties, neither of them's going to gain seats. Yeah. They both will lose some, and the question is how many do they lose? And then, as Jess says, what is the constellation that can be put together?
And it sounds better for it sounds better for the Labour Party.
Yeah, certainly the constellation sounds better.
Yeah, so the SNP and the Liberal Democrats are far more likely to go into a coalition with the Labour Party.
Or at least an arrangement.
And in those circumstances, if we haven't left on the 31st of October, a second referendum is very much on the cards.
My prediction would be hung parliament at this election, referendum within 6 months of it, and I'm still not wild about that prospect, and then another election.
I think he's probably right, but I would just like to flip those two things around. I think that maybe Boris Johnson gets his deal through on with a referendum attached to it. That would be...
Oh, that would be much... it's the only context in which I, at the moment, could support a referendum.
I'm pleased to hear you. I'll add you on to the numbers.
If it's attached to a deal... that happens, between now and the 31st of October.
He can make his deal more Brexity than Theresa May's. I'm absolutely fine with that. I just want the people.
Then it goes to a referendum.
Then I think it goes to a referendum. And you know what? That referendum should say that whatever happens in that referendum, it has to be enacted immediately.
Yeah, absolutely. And they said that would be a much better time to have an election. But of course, it requires him to take the initiative between now and the 31st of October.
All of this is having an election in the winter, so you know that enthusiasm we just had for elections.
Yes, I know, less so, because normally in April, May, it's wonderful. Flowers are coming out, and it's sunny.
People are in their gardens.
Impossible tan, nobody can
People are out cleaning their cars,
Nick, Jess, I shouldn't detain you in awful London any longer. You must go back to your people. Thank you very much indeed for your time. You may now remove your collars.